Hi, interested yogis and mindfulness practitioners. I don't know if you caught that first part. This video, short video, hopefully not more than 10 minutes, maybe just 5. I want to give you a little bit of a breakdown on the kind of intrinsic relationship between breath control and mind control, kind of sketching some of the way that the nervous system works to influence the pattern of our thoughts. And then to talk a little bit about the history of pranayama, breath practice, and its meaning and purposes and whatnot in the yoga tradition, which very much feeds this modern mindfulness style of practice where we kind of secularized and pulled these practices out from their cultural context in the Hindu subcontinent. So the first thing I want to talk about is just kind of a physiological reality, and that is that the brain is part of the nervous system, something we all know. It's kind of the biggest node of nerves that we've got in the body, but it relates to the entire nervous system of the whole body. And when we're attempting to control our thoughts, which are very much a nervous function of the brain's habitual patterns, it behooves us to be aware of this larger system of nerves which the brain is connected to, which is the body, and primarily the lungs, because the lungs cue the heart and are deeply connected to the brain. In the ancient tradition, we are told that the breath leverages the mind and the mind leverages the breath. We can diagnose the mental patterns through the patterns of the breath, and we can control the mental patterns by controlling the breath. So if you've had any experience of this, doing alternate nostril breathing or doing breath holds, we call kumbhakas, or doing 3-part breathing where you move breath through different parts of the lungs, or any other practices which allow you to control the breath with will, you may have noticed that the outcome is that your brain's a little calmer. It goes a little more flatline. It has a little bit more ease. We call this breath practice in the traditions of India pranayama. Prana, sort of like spirit, in spiritus, inspiration. It's kind of a term which bridges the concept of mind, the concept of energy, and the gross aspect of breath. And then ayama is a really cool Sanskrit term, which like many Sanskrit terms means both what it means and its opposite, which means both to restrain and extend. And this is something that happens in pranayama. We learn to extend the breath. We learn to breathe really slow and long. We learn to hold the breath for long periods of time. But we also learn to restrain it. We learn to contain it. We learn to kind of observe it as we hold it in the body in what's called a kumbhaka. Kumbha means pot, holding the breath in the pot of the body. When we hold it and watch how our mind moves or doesn't move when we hold the breath, and also how this idea of prana generally moves in the body. Prana is that kind of reference point in the Indian tradition to this Chinese concept that we also call qi, what we call life force. If we want to use kind of a modern physiological term, we might just say sensation. That's kind of the gross affect of it, or even emotion. Those things are all products of the movement of prana, or the particular patterns of movement of prana in our body. So mindfulness in the modern context is often used in, now in work contexts and everywhere, where we're kind of attempting to help people to open up that space between perception and response, which is where our kind of humanness lies, our capacity to be creative, our capacity to respond to the world in a healthy way. So a very valuable practice to entertain, to pursue, and I encourage it to all of you, maybe to take up a mindfulness practice for about 5 minutes every day. In that pursuit, breath work can be of value to us because it's a very concrete tool. It's very hard to chase the mind or control the mind because it's so slippery. It has this reflexive capacity to create thought and what we call ratiocination, to analyze. It's kind of what it does as a function, or to move emotion in the body, depending on how your particular brain is set up to function. But if we can control the breath, which is something very obvious, I can feel the breath moving through my mouth, moving across my lips. There's sensation there. If I'm sensitive, I can see how my chest expands, how my ribs expand, how my belly expands, and I can feel the touch of breath in my throat. I can learn about pranayamas if I examine some of the old texts, like the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, or even a lot of modern texts, like Light on Pranayama by B.K.S. Iyengar, published in 1981. Just highly recommended, a very comprehensive text on the yoga tradition. But there's many current books on pranayama, which you can learn to practice it. If you undertake one of those practices, it's kind of an easy way into mindfulness. Sitting and meditating is very difficult for every human being, and it may seem over daunting to many human beings. But if you can sit and do a little bit of breath practice, even something as simple as just counting your breaths, breathing in and out, maybe doing that 5 times and then starting again. 1 in and out breath, 2 in and out breath, 3 in and out breath, 4th in and out breath, 5 in and out breath, and then begin again. You're learning to train the mind. You're learning to restrain it, as it were, to watch the breath. And then as you work with the breath, if you meditate it, if you try to do something like what we call samyama, to equal the in-breath and the out-breath, then that's also going to help you to calm your mind, and it's going to wake up the observer. So breath practice, even from the most ancient texts of the Hindu tradition, we go clear back to Katha Upanishad from the 4th century before the Common Era. It gives us this metaphor of the Atman, the kind of being of will that we are, sitting in the chariot, which is the mind, and then holding the reins, which are the senses. The reins, I guess it's the reins, that's the mind, and the senses are the senses of the horses. We learn to hold the reins with our will, and that controls our senses so it doesn't go chasing, and our mind goes chasing and we get out of control. So if we can kind of enter into that complex of mind and will and senses through mindfulness practice, through pranayama practice, we can start to get a greater control of our lives. And some of the simplest breath practices in the world can be our entry point into a deeper and easier experience of meditation practice, mindfulness practice. And it goes back, clear back to kind of the earliest self-investigations from the Indian subcontinent. So I hope that was somewhat coherent and of use to you, and encourages you to attempt to work a little bit more with this concrete experience of breath as an entryway into your deeper mindfulness practice. I wish you well with it. Namaste. Eric Shaw signing out. Be well.